meeting. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the fifth session of the AIP conference. I'm Sarah Oxley Heaney, a first-year PhD student at the University of Exeter. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Please, can you make sure your mics are muted and turn off your videos? Each presenter will get 15 minutes, and as we go along, if you have any questions, if you can write them in the chat box or make a note of them on a piece of paper. And at the end, we can ask you to read out your questions, or we can read them for you if they're in the chat box and you don't want to speak out loud. Okay, now to introduce the three speakers for this session, who will be discussing aspects of animal encounters in urban spaces. First, we have Shruti Raghavan from the University of Transdisciplinary Health Sciences and Technologies in Bengaluru, India. Then we plan to have Xuemeng Wang from the University of London in the UK. And the third presentation will be Miriam Young and Maria Dominguez from the Parsons School of Design at the New School in New York, USA. Okay, over to you, Shruti.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction and for having me here. Let me just share my screen. I hope you can all see this.
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, all right. The map you are viewing is of a neighborhood in the capital city of India, Delhi. The route marked in blue is the route I tracked using a mobile application called My Tracks. While the map depicts the entirety of the route in a matter of a few minutes, in real time, the journey began at 8 a.m. and was completed by 4:15 p.m., which is roughly over 8 hours in a day. While I was walking along this route with the mobile application running in the background, this was not a route chalked out by me. Rather, this is the route of a cow who I go along with or follow, a cow whom I call Belle. Belle, like many cattle, particularly cows in Delhi, is left astray between the two milking periods. She, along with other cows in the herd, are let loose once the dairy farmer has milked them in the morning. While they all walk together till a certain distance, they each begin to disperse and find their way across the landscape of the city, only to return to the shed by evening, where they are milked and fed again. Belle covers a distance of around 4.5 kilometers a day as she walks on main roads, traverses through traffic, walks towards two-wheelers who stop to feed her and other cattle on traffic signal islands, forages through roadside garbage dumps, rests and ruminates on footpaths and in other spaces where there is either some shade or green cover, drinks water kept in mud pots, grooms herself, interacts with women who keep from a housing colony, who keep aside vegetable peels and grains for her, interacts with other animals such as dogs and pigs on the street, and so on. Over time, Belle has, in some sense, created an everyday route and routine, just as we do in our everyday lives. And while this is just one example, this is the case of most cattle across the cityscape, who via repetition create their own ecologies and everydays based on such encounters and interactions. And capturing this is what I refer to as bovine ethnographies. Hello, everyone. I'm Shruti Raghavan, a PhD scholar with the Urban Ecologies project from the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore, India. My research is primarily to explore the natures, cultures, and politics of bovines in urban India. And one of my sites of study is the capital city of Delhi. Now, to give you a context of the place and to understand why one encounters bovines in the everyday, it is important to give you a brief history of the place. Predominantly composed of villages and agricultural land, Delhi was inhabited by farmers, cattle rearers, and pastoral communities, amongst others. People and communities who migrated to Delhi migrated with their herd of cattle, goats, sheep, and so on. However, since the imperial capital was shifted from Calcutta to Delhi in 1911, and again post-independence, which is post-1947, the influx of people into Delhi grew drastically. Therefore, to accommodate this growing population, as well as to realize the vision of a capital city, the planning and infrastructural imagination of Delhi entailed the bordering and ordering of landscapes and of bodies. Agricultural land, barren land, and the village commons, which were typically used for the purposes of grazing, were taken over by government authorities, converting these lands into property, be it residential or commercial. And certain bodies, such as that of the poor, the homeless, the migrants, and animals too, were relegated to either ghettos, to the margins, to the peripheries, and to the outskirts. Because the urban was imagined as a space devoid of these bodies. And in the case of animals, they were designated to animal spaces such as that of zoos and sanctuaries or homes in the case of pet and companion animals. Domestic animals, such as that of bovines, have been considered a nuisance since the late 19th century, and both colonial and post-colonial governments have created animal spaces, such as dairy resettlement colonies, cattle pounds, goshalas, which are also cattle shelters, to remove bovines from the urban. Now, despite these multiple and continued attempts by state authorities, Delhi to this date is dotted with tabelas or cowsheds and small to medium scale dairy farms across the length and breadth of the city's urban form. And due to this very lack in space of being situated in the midst of what have come to be very busy and chaotic neighborhoods, dairy farmers leave their cattle astray. As a result, streets, garbage dumps, and other public space infrastructures, such as footpaths in the urban, have in some sense become sites of grazing for the contemporary cow, or even, one may argue, a phantom commons depicting the absence of erstwhile commons. This is why it is common to observe bovines, particularly cows, buffaloes, and bulls, who negotiate and create their own spaces across the city's landscape. It is in this regard that I approach the city of Delhi as a more than human landscape, specifically of bovines, by tracing their presence in colonial and post-colonial historiography, as well as in the contemporary. Now, this is carried out through diverse methodologies, including that of archival research and ethnography. And in this presentation, I focus on ethnographic methods, particularly that of bovine ethnographies. Where I approach the city as a shared and entangled place between its human and non-human entities, where each affects the other's world. In the case of bovines in Delhi particularly, the idea of creating one's space, one's routine, and placemaking occurs largely due to the mobile lives of cattle in the city. Unlike the notion of movement, which simply takes into account moving from point A to point B, the notion of mobility factors in politics, ethics, power dynamics, subjectivity of moving, and so on. In that sense, animals' mobilities, or rather bovines' mobilities taking from Hodges and Lorimer, attempts to understand how movement as well as its lack is experienced by animals themselves with and against the grain of human mobilities, planning, and design. As we gather from the previous section, contemporary bovine mobilities in the city is shaped to a large extent by human actions and how humans shape animal worlds, be it the conversion of grazing land into property, the restriction of animal movements, seizing cattle, impounding them, and so on. However, despite this, what we observe is that bovines experience lived realities and embodied experiences through their mobilities in the city. These mobilities can be referred to as critical mobilities, encapsulating both the curbing of past mobilities as well as the situation of present mobilities. So keeping the above in mind, Bovine ethnographies is a go-along method, which involves following bovines in the everyday. Traditionally, go-alongs involve walking with interviewees as they go about their daily routines, asking questions as they walk through certain places and environments. The potential of the go-along is not only in the emergence of certain hidden, fleeting, or even unnoticed relations with place and environment, but in its ability to capture the same as one walks and talks. In the case of animals, however, go-alongs involve following bovines in their mobilities, where they roam the streets, observing the routes they navigate, whether these routes in fact become habitual over time, observing who or what they interact with, what they forage on, the spaces they traverse, rest, and inhabit, as well as in their immobilities as they stand tethered in stillness, in stasis. In essence, giving a sense of bovine geographies within the cityscape. This mixed method encompasses ethnographic accounts, which is thick descriptions of bovine activities, observations, interactions of individuals as well as of collectives or herds, along with 10-minute ethological scan samples where I note down certain behaviors occurring during the day, as well as tracing and mapping the geography of the bovine's movement through a mobile application. The idea being to foreground the embodied experiences of bovines by combining ethnography, ethology, and geography as a means to understand what mobility and its lack entails not only for the bovines, but for human others, and in also rethinking the urban as a multitude of co-presences and a co-production of practices and of spaces. The crucial element here being that the bovine would lead the way, while I, the researcher, would follow making observations. In that sense, this is a method of more than human ethnography rather than of multi-species ethnography, because the focus is not only on or between species, rather there is an emphasis on ecology, social interactions, infrastructures, planning, design, human others, non-human others, landscape, jurisprudence, environment, all keeping bovines as prism. The question, of course, remains, what do these mobilities tell us about bovine bodies as well as the city? As we have gathered, each body provides us with a different narrative. A male calf, for instance, which is mobile or stray, is essentially one which has been abandoned. As most of us are aware, male calves are of no value to the dairy industry. And in many states of the country, they are banned from slaughtering practices since they are the progeny of the sacred cow. Most male calves, as a result, either die due to starvation, are impounded in cattle shelters if picked up by municipal bodies, or find their way into informal slaughtering practices. This also brings to light the development of sex-sorted semen technology, which ensures the birth of only female calves. Second, as mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, each cow tells us a different story of care, feeding, health, violence, affection, both within and outside the shed. At the same time, a common occurrence for most mobile cows is to forage in garbage dumps, consuming plastic and polythene in the process. Therefore, as much as the cow is revered and considered sacred by a majoritarian religious community, it is also the same community which turns a blind eye to the deplorable lives some of them lead. This again arises from the fact that cows cannot be slaughtered, and most dairy farmers keep their cows only until they are productive, post which they're either abandoned or sent to cattle shelters, which themselves are running out of space and funds, again resulting in multiple incidences of death due to starvation. Additionally, some cows too find their way into informal slaughtering practices, either within the city or of being smuggled to states where cow slaughter is permissible, which in itself has given rise to the issue of cow vigilantism against minority communities consuming beef. In the case of buffaloes, one rarely finds a mobile buffalo on the streets of the city. Buffaloes are predominantly tethered their entire lives because, unlike cattle, they're more economically viable for dairy farmers since they are reared both for dairy and meat. The lives of buffaloes, therefore, are tempered around the ecology of their shed. Feeding, milking, grooming, ruminating, standing, sitting, sleeping, practices of love, care, violence, all occur within that one space. But because these sheds are also situated within the urban and within residential neighborhoods, there are certain interactions with people, such as the feeding practices, as well as interactions with other animals, such as stray cattle and stray dogs who keep coming by the shed in search of food. However, the tethered lives of buffaloes also brings to fore changing rearing practices in the urban. Up until 20 to 30 years ago, the dairy farmer would leave his buffaloes to graze in what used to be a forest land across the shed. Today, that same land is occupied by individual homes and residential colonies who, along with the municipal bodies, believe that bovines have no place in the city and should be relegated to the borders and to the peripheries, if not the rural. What must it then feel like to live a tethered and restrained life where one is unable to walk when they wish to? This question is, of course, applicable to many animals who live their lives in battery cages, factory farms, and zoos, as well as to humans, particularly those belonging to minority identities and communities who are exploited for their labor and bodies. Returning to buffaloes, on the hind side, since they largely remain immobile, they do not consume plastic and polythene, unlike cattle who forage on waste and develop multiple health issues as a result. What we gather from this is that rearing practices followed and adopted by dairy farmers in recent decades have been influenced in large part by the changing socioeconomic structures as well as the changing land structures and relations. And in some sense, bovines too have had to adopt and adapt to modes of living within urban spaces, of navigating through people and traffic, finding spaces of rest and rumination, and of leading tethered lives. Therefore, and to conclude, it is through the method of bovine ethnographies that these narratives, be it of changing land relations, the question of the commons, infrastructures, urban planning and design, imagination of the city, rearing practices, ecologies of dairy farming, and the bovine themselves come to fore. As much as bovines have become a part of our everyday through their visibility, presence, and mobilities, it is by following them as they go about their everyday that we can rethink and relook at the everyday in the urban and city. Thank you.
Well, that was riveting, Shruti, absolutely riveting. Got so many questions, and people are starting to write questions in the chat, but we'll save those till the end, if that's okay.
Sure.
And we shall now ask Xuemeng Wang. Are you able to share your screen, Xuemeng? We can't hear you. I think you're on mute. Ask to unmute. There we go.
Yeah, of course, everybody did. All right. So I think I had a change last night. I thought about, because the output of the research was an artwork, and I thought, and it was sound-based, so I thought maybe it's better to just show that instead of me talking through. I had slides. If people have questions about the research, we can talk through that after the Q&A. I think maybe let the artwork speak for itself is much better.
Sounds fascinating.
It was originally an exhibition, so there are pictures. So I'm going to try to show you the script with the pictures, and it's not a perfect presentation, but I think it might work.
Great. Okay, right. Over to you then. Thank you.
What is it that you just saw? No, it's not abandoned or neglected. It's only neglected by you. It's not empty nor diffused. It is full of lives. Now look at picture 1. It is a shit house, right? But it is my home, for now, neglected by you. Come on, I was born and raised here. I'm a native local Hackney Wicker. Let me tell you something about my home. See picture 2 and 3. At first, from the 19th century, it was a pub. Those workers were working factories. It was a meeting point for my ancestors. They used to check in here and check out and raise home from here every Saturday night.
Probably my favourite memory was that pub on the corner there, and it's one of the famous pubs where you bought your pigeons and checked them out. You bought pigeons. Right, so on a Saturday night, I used to come round here with my mates staying and race pigeons on their bikes up there, and then we'd get a lemonade, and then I'd open the cocks up and see who won the race.
The industries calmed down. Some of these dirty jobs got moved away. No one has used it as a pub since 1995. Then the artists came. Who? The artists, designers, creatives, you know, that kind of people. My parents first moved to the area around that time, 2005, from Trafalgar Square. It was very different here. For many, this was a forgotten part of the city, bordered by a fridge wall. Picture 4. No pigeon spikes, and the food was safe. No birth control in them. Low rises and few cars. They dashed through the streets like a 100-meter Olympic Games champion. Picture 5. My parents lived in a hideout in a bagel factory. For obvious reasons. Wheat flour. They told me they know the area by different smell in the air. Ink, paint, petrol, chemical, and rotten onions. From our favorite workers, food wholesalers and manufacturers. People produce things and fix things. There were always curious objects in the middle of the street. See picture 6. The big willy beans that are like a swimming pool of trash. It's free for squirrels, crows, and us to dive in for a feast. The leftovers from the workers supplied artists too. See flowchart number 1. The artists took up the leftover warehouses and make a huge mess there, making one floor into 2, making 2 rooms into 1, rolling 3 things together, painting 4 walls paint, however they want. A new kind of warehouse, studios, and live workspace. They often found stuff workers don't and make them into weird sculpture or furniture or stuff. Or a skate park made entirely from rubbish. Picture 7. Picture 8, 9, and 10. That pub, the house you just saw, was a club by that point. A semi-illegal squat club. My parents say on those nights, the house would vibrate the whole night till 8 in the morning. The smell of hot and tobacco will fill the streets when the door opens. But the dancing, rave, stopped after a few years. And then I was born. So was the Olympics. One morning, I was woken up by an intense shake. Our home was lifted by a bulldozer. There you go. The bagel factory, my cradle, was gone. Picture 1. Actually, they started to build a new bagel factory where it was, except it wouldn't produce bagels. It will sell bagels on the ground floor, but with flats on top, and a concierge, and a gym. A luxury factory that doesn't produce food for me. So I moved to this building. the one you just saw. The artists don't like luxury factories either. There's no culture, no history, no soul or story, and they're too expensive. Flowchart 2. Some of the lucky workers manage to find something in the area and just move from one corner to another, like us. The formerly neglected factories become a hot resource. Both developers and artists fought to claim establishment over some old rubbish for their own benefits. Website 1 and 2. By then, Hackney Wick had the highest concentration of artists in Europe, mixed with other residences and workers. The artists, as the majority, wanted it as their habitat. For after all, it is they who define new ways of living in forgotten parts of the city and exuded cultural value out of their own neighborhood. As you see from website 3, forgotten? By whom? Various life forms, including the workers, have always been here. I caused Hackney Wick to become gentrified. Now, where's my 10%? Read a poster with neon pink polka dots. Picture 2. What about the establishment, the workers, and all the other life forms that have established here? We caused Hackney Wick to become rubbish, squattable, and gentrifiable. We never needed a 10%, but we don't want to be neglected. Picture 3. Hack the standard, the artist posted on my wall. Picture 4. Website 4, flowchart 3. They call the developers standard, but themselves creative class, and took over the street with the festival to celebrate the making of new standard, one that is cultured, authentic, and creative. Picture 5. They followed their standard and covered the entire building of my home in paint all over again. It's all about making marks on the wall, isn't it? I mark the wall all the time with natural organic paint, but people only wanted paint splashed the way they wanted. Picture 6. My roof was brushed rather carelessly. Shithouse to penthouse. As long as I have some sort of cover over some sort of platform, I'm okay with that. I'm always in the aftermath of human, taking whatever is left and make do with it. On a good day, I stand on a roof where it reads shit. Picture 7. When it rains or in the evening, I rest at where it reads penthouse. Picture 8. Picture 9 and 10 and website 5. This building is attracting people with cameras. They're the day trippers, taking photos. No, not of me, or of those walls under my feet. They don't live here. They come, they see, they take photos, they eat gluten-free vegan burgers, and they leave. Document 1. Some fancy dressers come and take photos too. Nor do they live here. They come, stand outside the buildings, contemplate on their structure, dribble down some notes, and leave. They are auditing the old buildings. Neither of them actually like the old buildings. Human people only like all the good things buildings say about them, and they like the ones that tell a better story, the selected few. Even if those good things are gone, it is enough just to enhance and review the look to tell the significance of the romantic past. These buildings are heritage assets, containing historical values, evidential values, aesthetic values, cultural values, communal values, and other valuable values. Document 2. Luckily, they think my home has a positive contribution to the area, the job. However, it's mainly because it's old enough from Victoria time and that it's the only building of residential use in the industrial area. Luckily. but it only has some aesthetic value. Translating to human language, it's ugly. Despite that, they will conserve it. No nature conservation, only the beauty. Picture 11. The area is looking more and more cohesive. The new buildings try to camouflage into the character and aesthetics of the old industrial style, but the new ones smell different, i.e., they don't smell. And they look the same. I worry that people would get lost. Document 3 and 4. All buildings have to follow a design code stolen from the industrial code, and they call this a creative neighborhood with mixed-use spaces. Mixed use, but doesn't involve any of the workers here. They would all need to go. They were never part of the plan, just like me. The artists tried their best to keep themselves in, but neglected to keep the rubbish in. Now there's no rubbish, they left. A new kind of artists are coming in. The kind that are domesticated by flat white. They just sit in front of their screens all day and don't hang out in the yard, cutting or welding or making a mess. It's the sort of art that's not very entertaining to watch. What's happening to my home now? It's not only my home, you know. It's also home to the mosses and fungus. It's an assembly of the neglected chairs, luggages, wood pieces. It's sort of a public platform. What does it say? Warehouse-style apartments for sale. The corner of the city while the row was sick and chat to your friends. Mr. Opera comes here every day to act your home because of the great foot traffic from the station. Then he's drawn home singing opera. Good voices he had. It could also be a waiting room to the station. It could be an outdoor cinema. It could be a small green park with all the vegetal life fertilized with my pool. It could also just be my home. But they have a plan already. Surprise! My home is at the prime location of the gateway to the area. So, the graffitis will be gone to fix the wall to reveal the original green tiles. They need to be kept clean, for they are the holy heritage assets. The rest of the facade will be commissioned to locally recognized artists. The drawings will be refreshed every year, so the building will be a living piece of artwork in an organized manner. It's going to be a pub again.
A que regrese la desdichada.
Okay, I think that's just towards the end. I think I forgot to set up the scene. So I did a project about urban waste in Hackney Wick in London. That was an area that is being gentrified now. It used to be an industrial area. So I think for some people who's not from UK or London doesn't know that, it might come like really strange. So I think that's just the background for it. I didn't do it at first with a pigeon in my mind, but towards the end, I thought it would be interesting to look at it through this kind of perspective. Yeah.
It was utterly captivating. I felt I was in an art museum and I needed to sit down and replay it. And I found myself scrolling actually as you were presenting. It was very, very interesting. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions at the end for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so now if we can ask Maria and Miriam to join us, and over to you guys.
Thank you so much. And I am so blown away by all of the presenters this morning or afternoon, wherever you may be. So yeah, this has been wonderful. So hi, everyone. We are so delighted to be here. My name is Miriam and my colleague Maria is also joining me today. So we are both students in an MFA program called Transdisciplinary Design at Parsons in New York City. It's a little bit early for us here. Hopefully we will stay nice and peppy for you guys though. So in our thesis, we're exploring how design can help us navigate questions around human-animal relationships. And we're especially interested in this notion of rewilding human thinking to get out of our more typical human thought patterns. So we're going to be talking through a project that we're currently working on with two of our other colleagues in the same program, Anjali Nair and Hannah Rose Fox, that sort of relates to soundscape ecology. So the previous presentation is actually perfect. We're right in that same zone of kind of thinking about audio and soundscapes. So we're going to dive into the project, give you just a little hint of what it is, and then explain some of the methods we've utilized in that work, as well as our work kind of more broadly, as well as some insights. So first, we're just going to go ahead and play a short clip. So if you want to just keep those listening ears going.
Thank you for holding. Thank you for listening. Welcome to the Sonic Apothecary. Are you here for mammalian service? Please affirm or say other. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Please vocalize again.
Before the great cacophony, it was hard to hear everyone in the city. The vibrations were strange back then. Many Homo sapiens, especially the ones who could pay for it, polluted with as much noise as they wanted. Their low-frequency emissions crowded out their creaturely neighbors. Songbirds couldn't get a peep in. High-decibel diggers rotted the soil. Bats got mixed messages and missed meals.
Okay.
So what you just heard is a clip from the Sonic Urbanism project that we've been working on. And the inspiration for this project comes in part from Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, in which she noted that the sounds of a given landscape could actually say a lot about its ecological health. In fact, we have seen the proof that noise pollution caused by humans wreaks havoc on ecosystems. Birds and insects often have to modulate the sound frequencies of their calls just to communicate with one another, and not to mention the many other animals and plants that are negatively impacted as a result. So we wondered, if sound can measure a landscape's health, could it also be used to heal it? In this project, we've created a fictional scenario. We imagine an alternative world where, similar to the concept of keystone species, which when introduced to an environment attract other species and can revitalize it, what if there were such a thing as keystone sounds that could do the same? In our sonic fiction, we imagine the Resounders, a group of sonic vigilantes who believe urban landscapes can be healed through sonic interventions. Their sonic apothecary serves as a kind of phone hotline and switchboard that emits sonic prescriptions to heal an ecosystem by reconnecting creatures whose voices have otherwise been drowned out. These sonic prescriptions consist of mating calls of species or non-living elements like wind and water that they pump out into urban environments in the hopes of revitalizing those struggling ecosystems. Of course, in this fictional world, we also have groups who oppose the Resounders, Some think soundscape ecology is a hoax and that humans have the right to be as loud as they want. Other groups, meanwhile, advocate for total silence, questioning the consequences of attracting and reintroducing species to urban environments, such as the resounders do. We even have the Bureau of Night Skies and Sonic Spectra, who represent a government agency that keeps a close eye on all of these so-called radical groups. And they consider themselves to be the only legitimate authority on sound ecology.
So you might be wondering, what does this strange fictional scenario have to do with anthrozoology and the kind of topics that we're discussing in this conference? So I recently attended a webinar series called Animals Climate Health that convenes scholars and researchers across disciplines interested in animals, climate change, and global health. And I was struck by a few of the quotes that I heard, both from presenters as well as from audience members. I'm just going to run through a few of these. So one, we need to reconceptualize how we're viewing non-human animals. We need to challenge long-standing conceptions of what we do and don't do and why we do it. We need to look into our relationship into the non-human animals we're not listening to. We can no longer afford to not hear them. I just want to underline the anthropogenic thinking behind terminologies. And finally, one speaker noted how experts are kind of sitting in their own silos in this work. And while we should respect expertise, we should also translate it across in a transdisciplinary manner. So that one particularly caught our ears, if you will, because of course our program is transdisciplinary design. So a few things that kind of stood out to me in those quotes. One was, this call for from scholars in the field saying, one, we really need to listen to perspectives to non-humans in kind of a more integrated way in our work. Secondly, that we need to kind of battle some of the default ways of thinking and knowing that center humans. And third, that we need to break down silos across disciplines of folks working on these issues. So transdisciplinary design borrows methods from various other fields like anthropology, ethnography, also performance and the arts. And I think it can potentially offer some approaches to address exactly these kinds of questions that we all might be kind of grappling with. So we're going to talk about a few methods, but before we do, I just want to pause to give a note on, trying to define the word design in one slide, which is very hard. So when you hear that word, you might think of lots of things like a beautifully designed website or a very lovely logo or maybe a really nice, well-designed room. These are the outputs of design, of different types of design, but fundamentally we think of design as a process. And this is sort of a famous diagram known as the design squiggle, which gives a sense of the circuitous route that design work often takes. Perhaps it looks familiar to you in your own research. I think it kind of models that research process as well. So in yellow, we're highlighting what we call kind of the problem formation stage. And this early stage research is where we're sort of interested in, thinking about how our work might potentially, where it might be placed. And so as a manager, I had once said, a well-defined problem is 80% of the solution. And the way we conceptualize problems tends to be kind of mired in maybe our autopilot ways of thinking. This is where bias and blind spots can kind of creep in. As we saw in these quotes that I gathered, there was a call from researchers in the field to find fresh ways of considering human-animal relationships, but then how can we decenter humans when we are unfortunately hopelessly human? So Maria and I, in our work together, not only in this project, but in others as well, have, experimented with different methods to try to get at this. And ultimately, these principles sort of bubbled up as far as how we think about rewilding our own thinking. So we'll go through some examples that kind of illustrate these. So first off is multi-species interviews. This really responds to listening to non-human perspectives. So here I am interviewing my pet rabbit, not through verbal means, but body language. This experiment is based off of a scholar named John Hartigan, who has a lovely chapter in his book called How to Interview a Plant, where he's using ethnographic practices to understand plant perspectives. So what I like about interviewing is it frames your creaturely colleague as an expert and that you are there to learn. And in terms of attunement over knowing, I'll never fully know what it is, of course, to be a rabbit or what all of his perspectives are, but I can use this kind of method to become more attuned to his creaturely ways. And it's also a way to just create a different type of space in between us in which we can co-create knowledge together. A second method that we've experimented with is we're calling screen unwriting. So screenwriting is typically used to construct a narrative for a TV show or movie. We have used screenwriting in sort of a different way to actually deconstruct our own thinking. So if you haven't used screenwriting before, it's pretty, has this sort of formula to it, which you can see sort of the setting, action, character, dialogue, which really asks you a series of questions about your own work. So who, what, when, where, why. As you can see here, I was using screenwriting to explore a kind of scenario involving a whale. So I ended up using some fictional languages to try to depict the various interactions that might be happening there. And what I've personally found in doing this exercise is that while it might not make good TV, it helps you sort of identify what are those moments where you are maybe centering humans as the protagonist again. Are you making, the landscape as the scenery and not as active characters, so to speak, who have their own, voices, quote unquote, who are also have agency. So I think this method is nice both for decentering ourselves somewhat as, the leading role, if you will, but it's also a way to look at kind of the broader connections at play in whatever particular phenomenon or creature you're kind of learning about. And then lastly, and Maria will talk a bit more about this, is a method that perhaps is her favorite method. Is called, we call it strategic disorientation. And so this I like to describe as, having kind of an out of country experience. So if you've ever traveled abroad or just to a new city or what have you, and that feeling you have of, you're sort of disoriented, you're trying to figure things out. Maybe you're trying to take the train for the first time and you need to sort of, what language is it in? Where do you buy the ticket? How do you put the ticket in the, in the turnstile and so forth? So those moments, like those kind of ordinary moments when we're traveling, we are switched out of our typical kind of autopilot mode where we can kind of cruise through life without thinking too much about it. It really wakes us up and we have to be fully present to what's happening. So we like to experiment with ways where we can trigger that same kind of feeling in whatever audiences we're engaging. So as you can see here, these two signs are from a fake town called Stanville that we imagined up, where humans and other creatures have different ways of engaging with each other. You don't necessarily know exactly what is going on or what these signs are trying to tell you, but it hints at a world that maybe has a different set of values. And by sparking your imagination, you can start to kind of piece together yourself, okay, what might this world look like? So fictions are a really great way, not only again for your own thinking to kind of get shift into maybe an alternate way of viewing these kinds of entrenched issues, but it's also a way to invite broader publics into your work and kind of imagine with people around very real topics, but using fictional approaches. And I will now hand it back to Maria to disorient us a little bit more.
Thank you, Miriam. So heading back to the project that we introduced our talk with, we'd like to go over some of the insights that we've gathered in doing this work. So first, I'd like to start by reading a quote said by Anthony Dunn, one of our professors and friends. "Keep holding on to unreality, not as an escape, but as a temporary occupancy to develop fresh eyes to look back at this world with. That really summarizes our intention behind this project. In building the speculative world, we were echoing our own global climate crisis and the different viewpoints and rhetorics that we hear daily from activist groups, government agencies, scientists, who all claim to speak the truth. As these parties pursue their competing interests and agendas, we start to wonder what voices are inevitably drowned out and lost in the static. We wanted to create a scenario in which we could question the human inclination to intervene in ecological systems without fully understanding long-term impacts. We wanted to challenge narratives in which humans become saviors of the planet and really underline that environmental solutions which center the human as a hero can actually cause a great deal of harm. So our goal has been less about finding the perfect solution and more about shifting conditioned ways of thinking about eco-challenges. Essentially, we're aiming to reframe mainstream environmental narratives and create a space for innovative thinking. Now, if this all seems pretty far-fetched, as it turns out, science fiction is already somewhat science fact. Researchers from the University of Exeter and University of Bristol have used sound to reinvigorate dying corals by playing healthy reef sounds, and they've actually successfully attracted fish back to the corals. They're saying that this acoustic enrichment could actually be a valuable tool in restoring damaged coral reefs moving forward. So if truth is sometimes stranger than fiction, then maybe in this way we can use fiction
Reestablish
to
coral. I think food would be the first thing you'd want.
Sorry,
I think I'm hearing
Yeah.
some feedback. Sorry.
Pudding season.
I think it's Gabriella, if you want to. Okay, I muted her.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So if truth is stranger than fiction, maybe in this way we can use fiction to reconceptualize our current relationships with the natural world. Perhaps we can consider non-human voices more deeply.
Maria, you're muted.
I'm so sorry. I think that was me. Sorry.
I just realized I was muted.
It's very timely. It's a very poetic move, yes, to mute yourself as you're talking. No, just kidding. Go ahead.
So anyways, I will end this slide with saying we're trying to bring in non-human voices and bring in diverse experts of all walks and gallops into the conversation through a collective imagining exercise.
And so, yes, we would love to discuss. I know we're about to discuss, so we welcome your questions now. We also just want to share that we will be presenting this work at a Teatro Mundi event coming up March 18th, which is all about listening to non-human life. So you might be interested in just generally all the other people that will be presenting there. So we'll share that in the chat right after this. But thank you all so much. We're delighted to be here and look forward to discussing.
I'm so blown away by today's presentations. The energy with all of them is just absolutely fascinating. I just want to go first back to questions for Shruti. So if anybody wants to put their hands up for questions to Shruti. Yanchen, you had a question. Maybe you'd like to ask? If Yanchen's not here, I can ask the question. Okay. So Yanchen is asking, have you had a chance to speak to bovine owners about how they square their moral, ethical, religious beliefs with the practical realities? Are there any common trends?
Okay, yeah, thank you for the question. I think there was a question before that as well by Martha. What would you like to see done with the male calves and non-productive dairy cows in Delhi? So I will try to respond to both these questions. So the method of bovine ethnographies is not to romanticize the lives of bovines in the city, but to really bring to light the entangled lives that they lead in the urban farm. And to really understand these entanglements, it is necessary to understand the nature of the Indian subcontinent, which is primarily an agrarian one, where more than half the population has been engaged in agriculture and its allied activities. And animal husbandry particularly is, of significance because of the subcontinent's dependence on animals for both their physical labor as well as for their produce. Now, before the cow protection movement in India, which was in the 19th century, the Hindu community would consume beef. And this was also how dairy farmers maintained a kind of, balance or semblance within the ecosystem. But it is because over time, when the cow began to be revered, considered sacred, considered to be a mother, that it resulted in some kind of an imbalance. So in that sense, it has become a sort of structural problem, which has affected the practices of dairy farmers themselves. And therefore, and more so in the urban, because of the necessity to be providing more milk to a larger population, that they also indulge in practices of, say, pumping in more oxytocin, and of course, leaving their cattle astray when they know that, cattle are foraging on garbage. And in that sense, one must acknowledge this, the nature of relations, be it with humans and animals, as a truly exploitative one. And this is the ethical conundrum of capitalism itself, which is largely exploitative in nature. And farmers in that sense too, what I have seen based on my interviews with them and my interactions with them is that they themselves are caught in this ethical conundrum. Because on the one hand, they consider, the cows to be, they say, ye hamare bacche jaise hain, which basically means that they are like our children. But at the same time, because they also have demands in terms of their livelihood practices, something that they have been practicing for generations to come, that there is no option but to indulge in these practices at the moment. So for instance, if you see in states where cow slaughter is legal, we do not see these problems of stray cattle, cattle consuming garbage, smuggling, and so on. I'm not trying to say that the solution to all of this is the slaughtering of cattle, but there is a lot in terms of, the identities of communities who are associated with these practices and the animals themselves that need to be taken into consideration with respect to these issues. I hope I've somewhere responded to the questions. I think you're muted.
Thank you. Yenchen and Martha, would you like to ask any more about Shruti's presentation? I'm not sure they're here, but thank you, Shruti. We might have some more. Sorry, go ahead.
Does that work?
Yes, Martha.
Yeah. I was just wondering, I've put it in the chat as well, but I may as well say it. Do you think, Shruti, that the sort of the correct that slaughter done sort of humanely or as humanely as possible would almost be kinder, in inverted commas, than letting a calf starve, for example, or eat garbage?
Yeah, I mean, again, there is no one way to respond to this, but yes, I mean, considering that when cattle are left astray, they consume garbage, or and which of course affects their health, affects the milk that people consume as well. But at the same time, they either though there are a lot of feeding practices that especially the Hindu community is something that has been adopted. It is not every cow on the street that gets fed. And so I think that in order to sort of achieve some kind of a balance, slaughtering would be a more humane method.
Okay,
thank you, Shruti.
Thank you. Luca, you have your hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, it's a bit more broader question for Shruti, but I hope it still fits. So you gave us a great perspective on free-ranging bovines in urban spaces. And I think, as you're from India, if I'm correct, that's quite different from what I have experienced coming from Germany. So the solution for urban spaces for free-ranging animals is that they are captive, and that we have basically managed to eradicate them living side by side with us. And I think a lot of the Western perspective is that this will happen in non-Western communities as well. But I would like to know whether you can imagine some sort of solution that could be implemented to keep free-ranging animals in urban spaces around in the future, solving the animal and human interests in regard, especially if you do think that the majority of citizens want to keep the free-ranging animals around, such as with the bovines, because they are so sacred nowadays.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that is one of, a question that one has to tackle. And I'm hoping by the end of this, I am able to, have some thoughts on that. But I think it's important to note that as much as bovines are stray in the urban, it is not because, that the general citizenry would like bovines to be stray. In fact, that is not the case at all. Right from the state to the middle class imagination of the city, and especially the urban, and particularly the capital city of Delhi, is imagined to, they want it to be a world-class city. And again, animals do not feature in this imagination at all, or rather they are imagined only to be towards the outskirts. And this is at play in terms of these dairy colonies, authorized dairy colonies, where dairy farmers and their bovines were resettled since the 1970s, and this continues till date. And there are various forms that this takes, whether it is the impounding of cattle, and dairy farmers are not allowed to buy back their cattle. So I wouldn't say that people in general would want to live with animals, because there is obviously, a discordance over here. I think it comes more from the dairy farmers themselves, because they believe that, they have been here for the last 60 years. And, they have created an ecology, whether it is with their dairy farming practices, and in some sense, the animals too have, and the animals too have had to adapt to the changing environment in some sense, which is why you now see them on footpaths and other kind of spaces. And some people, of course, over time have also sort of adopted, feeding practices at particular sites. So there is this imagination, which is in terms of an urban devoid of animals. But you also have these other kind of, smaller ecologies within the city, which are taking place and which are occurring. So I'm not really sure how to respond to what I would imagine in terms of a future place. But I think that is something to think about. So thank you very much for raising this.
Thank you, Shruti. That was wonderful. I'm going to move us on because we've got 8 minutes left, and hopefully Chris will allow us to have 5 minutes for each set of questions. So over to Xuemeng, please. If anybody has any questions for Xuemeng, could you put your hands up? Kerry, you had a question. Are you here, Kerry? And if not, Jess, you had a very similar question. Jess, Kerry, not here? Okay, so Xuemeng, I don't know if you can, there's Jess. Hello, Jess.
Hi, sorry, took me a while to find the button. Yeah, so this is my first question, I think. I just wanted to know what was the significance of the pigeon? Because pigeons are kind of synonymous with urban environments, but did you choose the pigeon because of that, or was it specifically to the location that you were interested in London?
So actually, before this project, I was not interested in urban animal-human relationship at all. This project was for core staff asked us to explore something about waste. So I was interested in ruins. So that was my starting point. But the first time I visited the ruin, there were pigeons there. So I thought that brings it to life. And also there are lots of different, like Georg Simmel, and they write about the generative power, like in terms of nature. But then there's another sort of literature that always talks about ruin is kind of fetishized without engaging with the social reality. But these two never meet. So I was also like, towards the end, I was thinking about like making them meet. And about this pub specifically, I did a social intervention that I find those planning documents I posted on the wall, which is graffiti anyway. So I don't think I'm doing vandalizing. Anyway, so there are people coming and going, and they think that, oh, it's going to be another pub. That is great. So I realized that people see things change. And there is also like Michael Thompson's rubbish theory, where things has to go down in value and then raise again. So this pub kind of goes this. But then I think this pub now is not going to be the same pub. So I need to find an angle to think what is actually wasted. The building itself is not wasted, but there are so many other things. So I thought about like borrowing the pigeon's mind and eyes to see waste, but also in the area it is industrial. So there's like lots of different other waste. That's why I mentioned like the rubbish being, did I mention pigeons? Maybe I didn't mention pigeons, but like also the change of food, the sensorial change in the area, and all these like food practice as well, like you from working class fried chicken maybe, and to now bagel, coffee, flat white. So there's a lot of these kind of trajectories in there. And actually towards the end, I was looking at the like just random history on YouTube and stuff. I don't know if you can hear very clearly at the beginning, there was like a Cockney, very thick Cockney accent. There's a guy from London. He was talking about, it was a walking tour that he went to, like there was like those guys doing like a Happy Week tour. And he was talking about on a Saturday night, when he was younger, he would bike to that area with his mate and to raise pigeons. The pigeon will check out that place. So, I mean, it was towards the end, and I thought that was so good because it was about working class culture, it was about industry, and then raised pigeon was so like connected to working class culture. I didn't have, but then it would go like too much wider, but also pigeon was something that lost through modernity, like the racing. But even the emerge of racing pigeon was because of technology, like telegraph was started. Yeah, I mean, there's another history about that. So there was a lot of intertwined in there. That wasn't this dissertation, it's just like a 4-month like course, but I thought, yeah, that maybe answer your question.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you. It's amazing, isn't it, how one species can tie in so many threads of culture and class and place. So yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you.
I thought your comment on the art as well, the Jackson Pollock type painting, which was not acceptable by pigeons but acceptable by humans, was really interesting comment. Okay, I just want to point to in the chat box, Chris has put the forum link in there for any extra questions. I will take these questions that are in the chat box and put them in there later, but obviously we're going to run out of time, so I just want to remind people to use that forum. So if we can now move on to Miriam and Maria. Maddie, you had a question. Are you here, Maddie?
Hi, yeah. I was just wondering if you could expand on why the idea of humans saving the planet is potentially harmful, and then also how would you suggest things like the climate crisis is addressed if it's not through human intervention?
It's a great question. And I also think this is a good discussion if we had more time to kind of like debate it a little bit. My feeling is this kind of goes back to the screenwriting methodology of just thinking about who is being centered as sort of the savior or the protagonist in that kind of conceptualization of, so it's not, I'm not in any way letting humans off the hook of like that we don't need to change our ways, but I think just getting out of this mindset of that we are the center of the story, that we are the saviors, and so forth. It's, in my mind, it's more a matter of we actually need to recognize that we're kind of a side character amongst others, and to the extent that we can like better attune ourselves to this kind of bigger web of life that we're a part of, that mental shift is actually a big part of, you know, in addition to taking action and all the other interventions, actually like having that perspective shift is sort sort of my thoughts on that. Maria, I don't know if you would agree or disagree or add anything to that. And maybe she is not here, or did Maria hop off?
I'm not sure, maybe Chris can, here we go, she's just coming back in now.
Okay, cool, sorry. Anyway.
Maybe you want to ask Maria that again.
Yeah, Maria, sorry if you didn't hear me. I didn't know if you had anything to add to why we should not think of humans saving the planet. So I just gave my spiel, but I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to it.
Maria, are you there? Are you with us?
I know, maybe she hopped off.
I quickly rejoined after my internet failed.
No, perfect timing, internet. Yeah, only if you had anything to add to sort of why we should not think of humans as saving the planet.
Just to challenge the anthropomorphic, anthropogenic, narratives. I think I may have missed a little bit of the question, so a little lost.
No worries. Why don't we move on to Eva, who also has some question. Eva, are you there?
Yes, hi, I'm here. Thanks, first of all, for this brilliant presentations. And I have a question for you, Miriam and Maria, about the part where you talked about interviewing other animals, especially the bunny. And like, what were your strategies to do that? I would be really interested in the practical aspects of this work.
Yes, yeah, I also if other people have done this too. It was something, so we looked at it as an experiment for sure. It was very interesting because with the rabbit, of course, I have an existing relationship with him. It was appropriate for me to pet him and to kind of engage in a very kind of, body language kind of focused way. In other cases, that might not be appropriate at all, or you wouldn't, of course, want to try to do that, and it might be more based on observation. I can, maybe on the forum, I can put in the link to, again, this piece by John Hartigan, that's How to Interview a Plant. I just thought it was really interesting because you don't, at least for me, I hadn't thought of plants as what would a plant say in an interview, but he's using, practices of observation, practices of ethnography, like note-taking and so forth. So I think there's different approaches that would be used for different kinds of creatures. For me, it was kind of went back to this practice of attunement. And how can I sort of understand what he's trying to communicate in whatever mode that creature communicates, and how do I convey something back to him? So in that case, using touch, using my hand as a way to sort of engage with him made sense, but that wouldn't be, of course, appropriate depending on the creature. So it's something we're experimenting with, but definitely, looking for, more examples of that as well too.
Okay, I know we're over, but I think we've got time for one more question from Jess. Are you still here, Jess? Yes, I can see you.
Hello. Yes, so I was really, really interested by the way that you use the term transdisciplinary. So this is something that I've been exploring as well. So I do a little bit of work with some artists in Finland, and we're doing a collaboration, and I keep saying we should call it transdisciplinary. So I would just really like to kind of pass on to them really your thoughts as artists. What does transdisciplinary mean to you? Why are you using it? How does it fit?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So it is literally the name of our MFA is Transdisciplinary Design. And I can feel the presence of all of my teachers kind of like, yes, Miriam, what is transdisciplinary design? What have you learned? So it's a great question. And I think, one of our professors early on talked about, the use of transdisciplinary as opposed to interdisciplinary, that there is this movement across, that you're sort of maybe zooming in, zooming out, moving across different fields, bringing some practices. So as you could see, screenwriting, which I'm not a screenwriter at all, but just kind of pulling in what are different methods from performance or from other kind of art-based practices. Maria does a lot of different kinds of visual art as well too. And I think specifically questioning knowledge production, what are acceptable modes of knowledge production? So is a sound piece, do we think of that as knowledge, especially in an academic space, or does it have to be a paper? Does it have to follow a certain format? So I think that's also a big part of it too, is how can you use other modalities to create knowledge and then actually share that as well too. Maria, anything you would add there? I know it's a huge question, but not to put you
That
on the
was beautifully answered. This is a running joke in our program. We're always like, what is transdisciplinary? Like, what does that mean? But Miriam really answered that beautifully. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Very much.
It's lunchtime now. That was absolutely captivating. I'm sure we could all stay here for another hour at least, asking a ton of questions. But please use the forum and have a lovely lunch, and we shall speak to you all later. Thank you so much to all the presenters.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for chairing, Sarah, too, and thanks for the great presentations. It's actually not lunch for another. We have another session in 15 minutes, or just under at 11:15. But I just wanted to mention, if anybody is presenting in the next or presenting in any of the sessions and your name is not the same as it is on the thing, can you just let us know so we can let you in beforehand? But yeah, great presentations, and thank you, Sarah.
Very welcome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.